Colonel Dane slammed his fist on the table and pointed straight at Elena. "Arrest her now! Cuff her in front of everyone!" His voice didn't shake, his eyes didn't blink. He said it like he was ordering breakfast. 47 people had just been pulled from a fire alive, children still coughing smoke from their lungs, and this man wanted the woman who saved them in handcuffs. That is where this story begins. But how we got here, that is what will keep you up tonight. If this is your first time on our channel, subscribe now. Follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. 11 months, that is how long Staff Sergeant Elena Vass had been stationed at Camp Pendleton's K-9 unit. 11 months since the transfer she never requested. 11 months since someone in a windowless office decided that a decorated combat medic with 9 years of field service belonged in a kennel. She never got an explanation. She got a reassignment letter and a one-sentence summary from her commanding officer. "You're moving to Animal Management, Vass. Report Monday." Animal Management, that was what they called it. Not canine operations, not military working dog support. Animal Management, like she'd be sweeping out stalls at a county fair. Elena remembered the morning she walked into the K-9 compound for the first time. 29 dogs, 29 pairs of eyes locked onto her the second she stepped through the gate. German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Dutch Shepherds, a couple of Labrador Retrievers trained for detection work. They didn't bark. They didn't move. They just watched her. And at the front of them all sat Max. Max was 11 years old, ancient by military dog standards. His muzzle had gone white 2 years ago, and his left ear had a notch from a piece of shrapnel he'd taken in Kandahar in 2014. He had been deployed 3 times, survived an IED blast that killed his first handler, and had more confirmed apprehensions than any other dog on the West Coast. He should have been retired. He should have been sitting on somebody's couch or somewhere in Virginia eating treats and sleeping in the sun. But Max refused to leave. Every time they tried to process his retirement paperwork, he'd stop eating. He'd stop responding. He'd sit at the gate of the compound and stare out at the base like he was waiting for something. So they kept him. And when Elena arrived, something happened that nobody expected. Max walked up to her, pressed his head against her knee and exhaled, long and slow, like he'd been holding his breath for years. Sergeant Reyes, who had been running the unit temporarily before Elena's assignment, saw it happen and just stood there with his mouth open. "He doesn't do that," Reyes said. "He doesn't go to anyone." Elena looked down at Max and put her hand on his head. Maybe he was just waiting for the right person. Reyes laughed, but it wasn't a joke, and both of them knew it. Over the next 11 months, something changed, not just between Elena and Max, but between Elena and all 29 dogs. She didn't just train them, she listened to them. She learned how Bella, the youngest Malinois, would tap her left paw twice when she was anxious. She learned that Duke, a massive German Shepherd with a torn ACL that had healed wrong, would growl low in his throat, not out of aggression, but out of frustration when he couldn't communicate what he needed. She learned that Shadow, a black Labrador, who had been flagged for behavioral issues, wasn't aggressive at all. He was grieving. His handler had been killed in Syria 18 months earlier, and no one had ever acknowledged it. Elena acknowledged it. She sat with Shadow for 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon and didn't say a word. She just sat there. And at the end of those 3 hours, Shadow laid his head in her lap and closed his eyes. That was the day Elena stopped thinking of this as a punishment. But not everyone saw it that way. Colonel Richard Dane had been the commanding officer of the installation's operations division for 6 years. He was career military, silver oak leaves on his collar, a wall of commendations in his office, and a reputation that everyone knew but nobody talked about openly. Dane didn't like problems, he didn't like questions, and he especially didn't like people who made him feel like he wasn't the smartest person in the room. Elena Vass was all three. It started small. A comment here, a memo there. Dane would walk past the K-9 compound during inspections and never stop. He'd glance at Elena, glance at the peas, and keep moving like the whole operation was beneath his attention. But then the comments got sharper. "How's the pet sitting going, Vass?" he said one morning in the mess hall, loud enough for half the room to hear. A couple of junior officers laughed. Most didn't. Elena didn't respond. She picked up her tray, looked Dane in the eye for exactly 2 seconds, and walked away. That 2 seconds cost her. The next week, her supply request for new tactical harnesses was denied. The week after that, the veterinary visit she'd scheduled for 3 dogs with joint issues was pushed back by a month. Then her request to expand the training area was rejected without review. Reyes noticed. "He's squeezing you out," he told her one evening as they were cleaning the feeding stations. "You know that, right?" "I know." "So what are you going to do?" Elena looked at Max, who was lying in his usual spot near the gate, watching the sun go down. "My job," she said. "That's what I'm going to do up on." But Dane wasn't just making her life difficult. He was building a case. Elena found out through a clerk she was friendly with that Dane had been logging every minor infraction he could find against her. A training session that started 4 minutes late, a report filed on the wrong template, a dog that barked during a visiting dignitary's tour of the base. Small things, meaningless things, but stacked together they looked like a pattern. "He's papering your file," the clerk said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen it before. He did the same thing to Captain Torres last year. Buried him in write-ups until Torres requested his own transfer just to get away from it." Elena felt the heat rise in her chest but kept her voice level. Torres was a good officer. Torres was a great officer, and now he's at a desk in Fort Polk, Louisiana, processing discharge paperwork. That's what Dane does. He doesn't fire you. He makes you want to leave. Elena didn't want to leave. Not anymore. Not because of the job, but because of the moms. She had made them a promise, even if she'd never said it out loud. She wasn't going to abandon them the way the system had abandoned her. The morning of March 14th started like any other morning. Elena was up at 500. She ran 3 miles. She showered. She dressed. She walked to the K9 compound in the gray light before sunrise and did what she always did first. She checked on Max. Max was standing at the gate, not sitting, standing. His ears were forward. His body was rigid. His nose was working the air in quick, short bursts. Elena stopped. "What is it, boy?" Max didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on something in the distance toward the east side of the base. Elena followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. Just the maintenance buildings, the motor pool, and beyond that, the fuel depot. "Easy, Max, easy." But Max didn't settle. He started pacing, back and forth along the gate. Then the other dogs picked it up. One by one, they rose from their resting positions and moved to the fence line. Bella, Duke, Shadow, Atlas, Copper, Ghost. All 29 of them, standing alert, focused on the same direction. Elena had never seen anything like it. She radioed Reyes. "You seeing this?" Reyes was at the supply building 200 meters away. "Seeing what?" "The dogs, all of them. They're locked on something east side. I don't know what's going on, but something's got them wired. Maybe a coyote. We had one get through the fence last month." "This isn't a coyote, Reyes. I've seen them react to coyotes. This is different. This is something else." Reyes paused. "You want me to come over?" "Yeah, I think you should." He never made it. At 0617, the fuel depot on the east side of Camp Pendleton exploded. The sound hit first, a deep concussive boom that Elena felt in her teeth and in her ribs and in the soles of her boots. Then the shock wave. It knocked her sideways into the fence. She caught herself, ears ringing, and looked up to see a column of black smoke punching into the sky like a fist. Then the alarm started. Every siren on the base went off at once. The automated evacuation system kicked in, and a voice began repeating over the loudspeakers in that flat mechanical tone that made everything feel 10 times worse. "All personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. All personnel evacuate immediately. Proceed to designated rally points. This is not a drill." Elena's training kicked in. She turned toward the K9 compound to begin evacuation protocols for the dogs. Load them into the transport vehicles. Move them to the secondary holding area 3 miles west. Standard procedure. She had drilled it a dozen times, but when she turned around, the gate was open. The dogs were gone. All 29 of them. Elena's stomach dropped. She spun in a circle, scanning every direction, and then she saw them. All of them, running east, toward the fire, toward the explosion, toward the one place on this entire base where no living thing should be going. Max was in front. His old legs were moving faster than she'd seen in months. He wasn't limping. He wasn't hesitating. He was running like he was 10 years younger, like something had taken hold of him that went beyond muscle and bone. "Max!" Elena screamed. "Max, no, come back!" He didn't stop. None of them did. 29 dogs are running in formation, not scattered, not panicked, moving together like a single unit with a single purpose. They had never been trained for this. There was no command for this. This was something else entirely. Elena grabbed her radio. "This is Staff Sergeant Vass at the K9 compound. I have 29 dogs loose on base heading east toward the fuel depot fire. I need support. I need someone to help me intercept them." Static. Then a voice she didn't recognize. "Vass, all units are redirecting to rally points. You need to evacuate. Now." "I'm not evacuating without my dogs." "That is a direct order, Staff Sergeant. Evacuate immediately." Elena looked at the smoke. She looked at the dogs disappearing into it. She thought about every rule she'd ever followed, every order she'd ever obeyed, every time she'd kept her mouth shut and done what she was told, even when it felt wrong. Then she thought about Max, pressing his head against her knee that first day, exhaling like he'd been waiting. She clipped the radio back to her belt and started running. Elena Vass ran straight into the fire. The heat hit her at 200 meters. Not warmth, heat. The kind that dries your eyes out in seconds and makes every breath feel like you're swallowing sand. The smoke was thick and black and moved in columns that shifted direction without warning. Elena pulled her shirt over her nose and pushed forward. She could hear the dogs ahead of her. Not barking, not howling, moving. She could hear their paws on concrete, their bodies brushing against walls and fences and debris. They were navigating the fire zone like they'd studied a map of it. At 300 meters, she found the first survivor. A young private, maybe 21, 22, was pinned under a section of collapsed wall near the maintenance garage. His leg was trapped and he was screaming, but the smoke was so thick that nobody could have seen him from the evacuation route. Nobody except Duke, who was standing over him, barking in sharp, controlled intervals. 3 barks, pause, 3 barks, pause. A signal pattern, a trained alert. But Duke had never been trained for search and rescue. Elena dropped to her knees beside the private. "I'm going to get you out. Stay still." "My leg, I can't feel my leg." "You don't need to feel it right now. You need to breathe. Breathe with me." She braced herself against the wall section and pushed. Her arms burned, her back screamed. The concrete shifted 2 inches, then 3, then enough for her to drag him free. "Can you walk?" "I don't know." "Then lean on me, we're moving." She got him at his feet, slung his arm over her shoulder, and started moving west away from the fire. Duke stayed behind. He didn't follow. He turned and went deeper into the smoke. Elena dropped the private at the first aid station that had been set up near the rally point, and a medic took over. She turned back toward the fire. "Sergeant, where are you going?" the medic shouted. "Back in." "You can't go back in there. Watch me." She went back in. And this time what she found stopped her cold. Max was standing in front of a collapsed building. Behind him, 6 dogs were arranged in a semicircle. Bella was scratching at a door. Shadow was pressing his body against a crack in the wall. Atlas and Copper were barking at a window on the 2nd floor. Ghost was running back and forth between 2 points, creating a perimeter. They were working, coordinated, organized. Like a team that had trained for this exact scenario for years, except they hadn't. Nobody had trained them for this. This was coming from somewhere inside them. Some instinct, some bond, some understanding that went beyond anything in any manual or doctrine. Elena heard it then. A voice, faint, coming from inside the collapsed building. "Help, please, we're in here, there are children." Elena's blood went cold. She grabbed her radio. "This is Vass. I am at the East Maintenance Complex, Building 7. I have confirmed survivors trapped inside. There are children. I repeat, there are children in the structure. I need rescue teams here now." The response came fast, but it wasn't what she wanted to hear. "Vass rescue teams are not authorized to enter the fire zone at this time. The perimeter is not secure. You are ordered to fall back to the rally point." Elena stared at the radio like it had slapped her. Not authorized, not secure, fall back. There were children inside a burning building, and the answer was fall back. She looked at Max. Max looked at her. And in that look, there was something that Elena would later describe as the most human thing she had ever seen in her life. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't instinct. It was a decision. Max turned toward the building and walked in. Elena followed. The next 47 minutes would become The most documented, most debated, and most controversial rescue operation in the history of Camp Pendleton. Not because of what happened, but because of who did it. A staff sergeant who had been sidelined into a dead-end assignment, and 29 dogs who refused to leave people behind. 47 survivors. That was the final count. 47 men, women, and children pulled from the fire zone by Elena Vass and a pack of military dogs who answered to no command but their own conscience. And when the last survivor was carried out, when the last child was placed into the arms of a waiting paramedic, when the smoke began to thin and the sirens began to fade, Elena stood in the ash in the silence and looked at her dogs. They were all there, all 29, burned, exhausted, some limping, some bleeding, but all alive and all looking at her. Max walked over and sat beside her. He leaned his body against her leg and exhaled again. That same long, slow exhale from 11 months ago. Elena put her hand on his head and closed her eyes. That was when the convoy arrived. 3 Humvees, 2 military police vehicles, and a black sedan with tinted windows. The doors opened and Colonel Richard Dane stepped out. He didn't look at the survivors. He didn't look at the paramedics. He didn't look at the smoking ruins or the 47 people who were alive because of what had just happened. He looked at Elena. Staff Sergeant Vass. Elena opened her eyes. You are under arrest for insubordination, direct violation of an evacuation order, unauthorized deployment of military assets, and endangerment of government property. He glanced at the dogs. Government property. That's what they are, Sergeant. Property. Elena stood up straight. Max stayed pressed against her leg. Sir, 47 people were trapped in that fire. Your authorized rescue teams weren't coming. If you had waited, you would have followed orders. That's what soldiers do. They follow orders. Soldiers also save lives, sir. Dane's face didn't change. Cuff her. 2 MPs stepped forward. Elena didn't resist. She held out her wrists, but as the metal closed around them, she kept her eyes on Dane. You knew, she said quietly. Dane blinked. For the first time, something shifted behind his eyes. Something small, something quick, something that looked a lot like fear. You knew people were in that building, Elena said, and you gave the order to stand down anyway. You don't know what you're talking about, Sergeant. Maybe not yet, but I will. They put her in the back of the MP vehicle. They drove her away from the fire, away from the survivors, away from her dogs. Max watched the vehicle leave. He didn't bark. He didn't chase it. He just watched. And then he did something that Sergeant Reyes, who had finally arrived at the scene, would later testify to under oath. Max turned and looked directly at the black sedan where Colonel Dane was standing, and he growled, low, long, sustained, a sound that Reyes said he had never heard Max make in all the years he'd known that dog. It wasn't a warning, it wasn't aggression. The handcuffs were too tight. Elena felt the metal biting into her wrists every time the vehicle hit a bump, and the road to the detention facility had plenty of bumps. She sat in the back of the MP vehicle with her head straight and her mouth shut, but her mind was running faster than the engine. 47 people. She kept coming back to that number. 47. 14 of them were children. She had carried 2 of them herself. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, who had wrapped her arms around Elena's neck so tight that the bruises were already forming. And a boy, maybe 7, who hadn't cried, hadn't screamed, had just looked at her with these enormous brown eyes and whispered, "Are the dogs okay? Are the dogs okay?" That was what a 7-year-old boy asked while being pulled from a fire. Not about himself, about the dogs. Elena pressed her cuffed hands against her knees and squeezed until her knuckles turned white. The MP driving the vehicle glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Young guy, couldn't have been older than 23. He looked uncomfortable. He kept shifting in his seat, adjusting his grip on the wheel, checking the mirror again. "You all right back there, Sergeant?" he finally asked. "I'm fine. For what it's worth," he said quietly, then stopped. "For what it's worth, what?" He paused. "My sister works at the daycare on the east side, Building 9. She was in the fire zone." He swallowed hard. "She's one of the 47. Elena closed her eyes. "So for what it's worth," the MP said thank you. Elena didn't respond. She couldn't. If she opened her mouth right now, she was going to lose the only thing she had left, which was her composure. They processed her at the detention facility at 0847. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings inventoried and confiscated. They put her in a holding room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. Standard interrogation setup. Elena had seen enough of them to know. She sat down and waited. At 09:23, the door opened and a JAG officer walked in, Captain Lena Woodard. Mid-30s, short hair, reading glasses perched on top of her head. She was carrying a legal pad and a cup of coffee, and she set both on the table without looking at Elena. Staff Sergeant Elena Vass, I'm Captain Woodard, Judge Advocate General's Corps. I've been assigned as your preliminary counsel. Assigned or volunteered? Woodard looked up. Does it matter? It tells me whether you actually want to help me or whether you drew the short straw. Woodard sat down and pulled her glasses onto her nose. I read the incident report on the drive over. You violated a direct evacuation order, left your assigned post during a base-wide emergency, released 29 military working dogs without authorization, and entered an active fire zone that had been designated off-limits by the commanding officer. That's what the report says. Is it accurate? Every word, Woodard leaned back. Then you understand that Colonel Dane has enough to court-martial you 3 times over. I understand that Colonel Dane ordered rescue teams to stand down while people were burning alive. Does your report say that? Woodard's pen stopped moving. She looked at Elena over the top of her glasses. Say that again. Elena leaned forward. At approximately 06:24, 7 minutes after the explosion, I radioed command and reported confirmed survivors trapped in Building 7 of the East Maintenance Complex. I specifically stated that children were present. The response I received was that rescue teams were not authorized to enter the fire zone. I was ordered to fall back. Who gave that order? The voice on the radio didn't identify themselves. But there is only one person on this base who has the authority to hold back rescue teams during an active emergency, and he's the same person who had me arrested. Woodard wrote something on her pad, then she wrote something else. Then she put her pen down and looked at Elena with an expression that was impossible to read. Sergeant Vass, I need you to understand something. What you're telling me, if it's true, changes the nature of this case entirely. This isn't just an insubordination charge. If Colonel Dane deliberately delayed rescue operations while knowing survivors were present, that's dereliction of duty at minimum. At maximum, it's criminal negligence, resulting in potential loss of life. I know what it is. Do you have proof? Every radio transmission on this base is recorded. Pull the logs from 0617 to 0700 this morning. Every word is on tape. Woodard stood up. Don't talk to anyone. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. I'll be back. She left the room. Elena heard her footsteps moving fast down the hallway, almost running. Elena sat alone in that room for the next 3 hours. No one came. No one brought water. No one told her what was happening. The camera in the corner kept recording its red light, blinking like a heartbeat. At 12:47, the door opened again, but it wasn't Woodard. It was Sergeant Reyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, even though it had only been 6 hours since the explosion. His uniform was covered in soot, and there was a bandage on his right hand that he kept flexing like it was bothering him. How did you get in here? Elena asked. I told them I had information relevant to your case, which I do. He sat down across from her and lowered his voice. Elena, the footage is out. What footage? All of it. Somebody recorded the whole thing. You, the dogs, the rescue, every second of it. Base security cameras, plus at least 2 personal phones. It hit the internet 40 minutes ago. Elena felt her chest tighten. How bad is it? Reyes shook his head slowly. It's not bad. It's the opposite of bad. Elena, it's everywhere. Every news channel, every website, every social media platform. 29 military dogs running into a fire. You pulling children out of a building. Max leading the whole operation. People are losing their minds over this. It has 11 million views, and it's been less than an hour. Elena blinked. 11 million. And climbing. CNN called the base public affairs office. So did Fox, NBC, The Washington Post, The New York Times, and about 30 foreign outlets. The base switchboard crashed twice. Elena put her hands flat on the table. Reyes, what about the dogs? Are they okay? Are they hurt? Some burns, some smoke inhalation. Duke's got a deep laceration on his shoulder that needed stitches. But they're all alive, every single one. The vet team is with them now. And Max, Reyes hesitated. Max. Max is stable, but his lungs took a lot of smoke, Elena. He's old. His body can't process it the way the younger dogs can. The vet said the next 24 hours are critical. Elena pressed her fists against her eyes and took a breath that shook in her throat. He went in first. He didn't hesitate, not even for a second. I know, I saw the footage. Everyone saw the footage. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Reyes leaned in even closer. There's something else, something that's not in the footage. Elena dropped her hands. What? After they took you away, I went back to the scene. I wanted to check the perimeter, make sure no one was still inside. While I was there, I ran into a guy from the base fire department. Lieutenant Casey Bowen. Good guy, 15 years on the job. He told me something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Tell me. Bowen said his team was ready to go in, full gear hoses charged rescue plan mapped out. They were at the staging point by 0621, 4 minutes after the explosion. They could have been inside Building 7 in under 3 minutes. So why weren't they? Because they got a direct order to hold position. Stand down. Do not enter the fire zone under any circumstances. Elena's jaw tightened. From who? Bowen said the order came through the emergency command channel. In Elena, there's only one person who controls that channel during a base-wide emergency. Dane. The room felt smaller. The air felt thinner. Elena stared at the table for a long time, and then she said something that Reyes would remember for the rest of his life. He wasn't just trying to keep me in line. He was trying to make sure those people didn't get saved. And I need to know why. Reyes nodded. I'm working on it. But Elena, you need to be careful. Dane knows the footage is out. He knows the public is watching. And a man like Dane, when he feels cornered, he doesn't retreat. He attacks. Then he better bring more than handcuffs. Reyes left at 13:15. Woodard came back at 13:40, and she wasn't alone. A man in civilian clothes walked in behind her. He was around 60, lean, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that said military even though he wasn't wearing a uniform. His eyes were sharp and steady, and he carried a single manila folder under his arm. Sergeant Vass, this is Warren Salas, Woodard said. He's a former military intelligence officer. He reached out to my office an hour ago with information he believes is relevant to your case. Elena looked at Salas. Former intelligence. What branch? DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, retired 8 years ago. He sat down and placed the folder on the table but didn't open it. Sergeant Vass, I'm going to ask you a question and I need you to answer honestly. Go ahead. Have you ever heard of Operation Nightfall? Elena searched her memory. No. Good, because you shouldn't have. It was classified. Fallujah 2006. Joint Special Operations. 14 Marines, 8 K-9 units, and a tactical intelligence team. The mission was to clear a compound believed to be housing high-value insurgent targets. What happened? Salas's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. The intelligence was wrong. The compound wasn't housing insurgents. It was housing civilians. 31 of them. Women, children, elderly. The assault team went in hard and fast, and by the time they realized the mistake, 11 civilians were dead. Elena felt the room tilt. 11. 11. The dogs were sent in first, and they refused to attack. Every single one of them broke off their engagement and started pulling civilians to safety, just like your dogs did today. The handlers were confused. Command was confused, but the dogs knew. What does this have to do with Dane? Salas opened the folder. Richard Dane was the intelligence officer who provided the target assessment for that operation. He was the one who identified the compound as hostile. And when the truth came out, he was the one who buried it. Elena's breath caught. The after-action report was falsified, Salas continued. The civilian casualties were reclassified as combatant casualties. The handlers who reported that the dogs refused to engage were disciplined. 2 of them were discharged. The dogs from that mission were scattered across different bases, and 3 of them were euthanized within 6 months, listed as behavioral problems. Euthanized, Elena whispered. They killed the dogs because the dogs told the truth. They killed the dogs because the dogs were evidence. And the people who could have testified were silenced, transferred or threatened into submission. I spent 7 years trying to get this information declassified. Every request was denied. Every appeal was blocked, and every single time the name that appeared on the denial was Richard Dane. Elena looked at the folder. What's in there? Everything. Original field reports, communication logs, autopsy records for the civilians, handler statements before they were coerced into retracting them, veterinary records for the maze including the 3 that were destroyed, and a signed memo from then-Captain Richard Dane authorizing the reclassification of the target assessment after the operation. Why are you bringing this to me now? Solis closed the folder and placed his hand on top of it. Because I watched the footage this morning, Sergeant. I watched 29 dogs run into a fire to save lives while a colonel ordered everyone else to stand down. And I recognize the pattern. Dane doesn't protect people. He protects himself. He did it in Fallujah and he's doing it here. The only difference is that this time there's a camera rolling and a whole country watching. Woodard spoke up. Sergeant Vass, the charges against you are still active. But with this information, the scope of this case has expanded significantly. This isn't just about you disobeying an order. This is about a 20-year pattern of misconduct by a senior officer. What do you need from me? Your testimony, your records, your cooperation with an independent investigation, and most importantly, your willingness to not back down. Elena looked at Solis. She looked at Woodard. She looked at the camera in the corner that had been recording everything. I've got 29 dogs who ran into a fire because they couldn't stand by while people suffered. You think I'm gonna sit in this chair and back down? Woodard almost smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. At 1600, Elena was informed that the base commander, General Morrison, had ordered a temporary suspension of all charges pending a formal review. She was released from detention but confined to quarters. The order came with a note that read in full, "No further action against Sergeant Vass until review is complete. All related documentation is to be preserved and secured." Reyes was waiting outside the detention facility when she walked out. He had a bottle of water and a protein bar, and he handed both to her without a word. Elena drank half the water in one pull. "How's Max?" "Holding on. He's a fighter. I need to see him." "Elena, you're confined to quarters." "Reyes, I need to see him." Reyes looked at her for a long time. Then he pulled out his keys. "Get in the truck. If anyone asks, I'm transporting you as part of the investigation." They drove to the veterinary clinic in silence. When Elena walked in, she found Max lying on a padded table with an oxygen line running to a small mask near his muzzle. His eyes were closed. His breathing was shallow but steady. Elena knelt beside him and put her hand on his chest. She could feel his heart beating, slow, strong, stubborn. "You stupid, brave, incredible dog," she whispered. "Don't you dare leave me. We're not done yet." Max's tail moved. One small, weak thump against the table. Just once. But once was enough. Elena pressed her forehead against his fur and stayed there for a long time. And somewhere across the base in an office with commendations on the wall and a career built on lies, Colonel Richard Dane picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 18 years. The voice on the other end answered on the second ring. "It's Dane," the colonel said. "We have a problem. The Fallujah file. Someone has it." The line was quiet for 3 seconds. Then the voice spoke. "Then make it disappear. Like last time." Dane looked out his window at the smoke still rising from the east side of the base. "This isn't like last time. This time the whole world is watching." "Then you better move fast, Colonel, because if that file goes public, it's not just your career that burns, it's all of ours." The line went dead. Dane set the phone down and stared at his hands. They were shaking. For the first time in 20 years, Colonel Richard Dane was afraid. The phone call Dane made at 16:23 that afternoon was supposed to fix everything. It had always fixed everything before. One call, one favor, one file shredded or reclassified or lost in a system too bloated for anyone to notice. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. But Dane didn't know that while he was dialing that number, a man named Marcus Dell was sitting in a rental car outside the main gate of Camp Pendleton, watching the smoke rise and making a phone call of his own. Marcus Dell was 44 years old. He had a beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks, a duffel bag in the back seat, and a look in his eyes that said he hadn't slept right in a very long time. He had driven 11 hours straight from Tucson without stopping for anything except gas and a bottle of water he never opened. He had seen the footage on his phone at a rest stop outside Yuma, and he had pulled back onto the highway before the video was even finished. He knew those dogs, not these specific 29, but he knew what they were. He knew what they could do. He knew because he had seen it before. Fallujah, 2006. A night he had spent 18 years trying to forget and 18 years failing. Marcus dialed the number for the base public affairs office. It rang 9 times before someone picked up. Camp Pendleton Public Affairs, this line is currently restricted to. My name is Marcus Dell. I'm a former Marine, service number 8847219. I served under then Captain Richard Dane in Fallujah in 2006 during Operation Nightfall. I have direct first-hand testimony regarding the classified events of that operation, and I need to speak with whoever is handling the investigation into today's incident. Silence on the line. Then, sir, I'm going to need to transfer you. Then transfer me, now. It took 4 transfers, 11 minutes in one thread, to walk straight to the nearest news camera outside the gate before Marcus was connected to Captain Lena Woodard. Mr. Dell, this is Captain Woodard with the JAG office. I understand you have information regarding... I don't just have information, Captain. I have the truth, and I've been carrying it for 18 years because the United States Marine Corps told me I'd spend the rest of my life in a cell if I ever opened my mouth. But I watched that video today. I watched those dogs do exactly what our dogs did in Fallujah, and I watched a colonel try to stop it. Again. So you tell me where to go, and I'll be there in 10 minutes. Woodard told him. At 17:02, Marcus Dell walked into the JAG office at Camp Pendleton and sat down across from Captain Woodard and Warren Salas. His hands were steady, but there was a vein in his temple that pulsed every time he said Dane's name. Start from the beginning, Woodard said. The beginning. Marcus almost laughed. The beginning was a briefing room in Camp Fallujah at 2300 hours on November 12, 2006. 14 of us, plus 8 dogs and their handlers. Captain Dane stood at the front of the room with a pointer and a satellite image and told us we were hitting a high-value target compound. He said intelligence confirmed at least 4 insurgent leaders inside. He said the compound was fortified. He said to expect resistance. And you believed him. We were Marines. We didn't question intelligence assessments from a DIA officer. That wasn't our job. Our job was to execute the mission. Salas leaned forward. What happened when you reached the compound? Marcus's jaw worked for a moment before he spoke. We breached at 0130, standard entry. Flashbangs, door charges, the whole package. The dogs went in first. That was protocol. They were supposed to locate and engage any armed targets, clear the rooms ahead of us. But they didn't. No, they didn't. Every single dog broke off the moment they crossed the threshold. All 8 of them. They stopped, turned around, and started herding people toward the exits. Not attacking. Herding, like sheepdogs. We didn't understand what was happening. Sergeant Coburn, he was the lead handler. He was screaming commands, and the dogs just ignored him. Completely ignored him. Because there were no combatants inside, Salas said. There was nobody inside that compound who was over the age of 60 or under the age of 12, except for a few women in their 20s and 30s. It was families. 3 families sharing a compound because their homes had been destroyed in the fighting. 31 people, women, children, old men, not a single weapon in the entire building. Woodard's pen hadn't moved in a full minute. What happened next? Marcus closed his eyes. It was dark. It was loud. We had flashbangs going off, people screaming, dogs barking. Some of the guys on the team didn't realize what was happening fast enough. They saw movement and they reacted the way they'd been trained to react. 11 civilians were killed. Marcus opened his eyes and they were wet. 11, 3 of them were children. The youngest was 4. The room was silent for a long time. After it was over, Marcus continued, Dane showed up. He walked through that compound and looked at the bodies, and I swear to God his face didn't change. Not a flinch, not a blink. He looked at those dead children like he was looking at furniture. Then he turned to us and said 5 words. This never happened, understood, and you went along with it. Marcus's voice cracked. We were 22, 23 years old. He was a captain with DIA credentials who told us that if any of us talked, we'd be charged with war crimes. He said the intelligence was correct and that the civilians were being used as shields. He said it was their fault, not ours. And then he filed a report that said the compound was a confirmed hostile site and that all casualties were combatants. And the dogs? Marcus's face changed then. Something broke behind his eyes that had been holding together for 18 years. The handlers filed reports saying the dogs refused to engage. Dane collected every single one of those reports personally. He told the handlers that the mice had malfunctioned. That was the word he used, malfunctioned, like they were machines. He recommended all 8 dogs for immediate behavioral reassessment. 3 were euthanized, Salas said. 3 were euthanized within 6 months. Rex, Saber, and Nala, listed as aggressive behavioral failures. They weren't failures. They were the only ones in that compound who got it right. They knew. They knew those people were innocent, and they tried to save them. And Dane killed them for it. Marcus pulled something from his jacket pocket, a photograph creased and faded. He placed it on the table. It showed a young Marine in desert fatigues kneeling beside a German shepherd with a black muzzle and intelligent eyes. That's me and Rex, taken 3 days before the operation. Rex was my dog. I raised him from a puppy at Lackland. He was the best dog I ever worked with. The smartest. The bravest. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. When they told me he'd been put down, I went to Dane's office. I stood in front of his desk and I asked him why. You know what he said? Woodard shook her head. He said, a dog that won't follow orders is a liability, Corporal. Just like a Marine who asked too many questions. And then he had me transferred to a supply unit in Kuwait the next day. I never handled a dog again. Woodard picked up the photograph carefully. Mr. Dell, are you willing to testify to everything you've just told me under oath? Captain, I drove 11 hours to get here. I haven't slept in 2 days. I have spent 18 years waking up at night hearing the sound Rex made when they took him away from me. I watched a video today of 29 dogs doing exactly what Rex and the others did, saving lives, that a man in a uniform decided weren't worth saving. So yes, I will testify. I will testify in front of a judge, a jury, a congressional committee, or the President of the United States. I don't care. I'm done being quiet. Woodard looked at Salas. Salas nodded. We need to get this to General Morrison tonight, Woodard said. At 1845, while Marcus Dell was being escorted to temporary quarters on base, something happened that none of them expected. Elena, still confined to her quarters, received a visitor. Not Reyes, not Woodard. A woman she had never seen before. The woman was in her 50s, civilian clothes, no identification visible. She knocked on Elena's door twice and waited. Elena opened the door. Who are you? My name is Catherine Boyle. I'm a journalist with the Washington Post. And before you close this door, you should know that I've been investigating Richard Dane for 3 years. Elena didn't close the door. How did you get on base? I have my sources, the same sources who gave me this. Catherine reached into her bag and pulled out a printed email. She held it up so Elena could read it. The email was dated that morning, 0619, 2 minutes after the explosion. It was sent from Colonel Dane's personal military account to an address Elena didn't recognize. The message was 3 sentences long. Fuel depot compromised. Casualties expected east side. Do not authorize rescue until structural collapse confirmed. Elena read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. Do not authorize rescue until structural collapse confirmed. He wanted the buildings to collapse. He wanted the evidence destroyed. He wanted those people buried under rubble before anyone could reach them. Elena's hands were shaking. Where did you get this? A source inside the base communications office. Someone who has been feeding me information about Dane for 8 months. This email was flagged by the server's automated security scan because it was sent through an unauthorized relay. Dane tried to delete it 20 minutes later, but the backup had already been archived. He knew. Elena's voice was barely audible. He knew people were in there and he wanted them dead. Not dead specifically. He wanted the east side of the base destroyed beyond recovery. And I think I know why. Catherine pulled out a second document. 3 months ago, a routine facilities audit flagged an anomaly in the storage logs for the East Maintenance Complex. Building 7, the same building where your survivors were trapped, was listed as an empty storage facility. But the audit found that the building had been drawing power water and climate control consistent with active use for at least 5 years. Active use for what? That's what I've been trying to find out. My source believes that Building 7 was being used as an off-books archive. Physical documents, hard copies, the kind of records that can't be hacked, can't be remotely deleted, and can't be traced through any digital system. Elena sat down on the edge of her bed. Dane's records, from Fallujah, from every operation he buried. Not just Fallujah. My investigation has uncovered at least 4 other incidents across a 12-year period where Dane was linked to falsified intelligence assessments. Fallujah was the worst, but it wasn't the only one. And if those physical records exist, they're the proof that ties everything together. And he blew up the fuel depot to destroy them. Catherine paused. I can't confirm that yet, but the timing is suspicious. The fuel depot was scheduled for decommissioning next month. It had been flagged for safety concerns for over a year. A catastrophic failure at that specific location at that specific time, creating a fire that just happened to engulf the exact building where those records might be stored. That's not a coincidence. No, it isn't. Elena stood up. I need to talk to Woodard. Woodard already knows I'm here. She's the one who approved my access. Elena stared at her. Woodard sent you to me. Woodard is building a case, Sergeant, and she's building it fast because she knows that every hour that passes gives Dane more time to cover his tracks. She needs your testimony, Dell's testimony, Solace's documents, and my investigation. Alone, each piece is vulnerable. Together, they're a wall Dane can't knock down. At 20:30, Elena was escorted not back to detention, but to General Morrison's office. The room was crowded. Woodard was there. Solace was there. Marcus Dell, cleaned up but still looking like he hadn't slept in days, was there. Catherine Boyle was there with a laptop open on the conference table. And at the head of the table sat General Thomas Morrison, a 3-star who had commanded Camp Pendleton for less than a year and who was now staring at the evidence spread across his table like a man watching a building collapse in slow motion. Let me understand what I'm looking at, Morrison said. His voice was calm, but Elena could see his jaw muscles working overtime. You're telling me that a colonel under my command deliberately delayed rescue operations during today's emergency, that this same colonel is linked to a 20-year cover-up of a civilian massacre in Fallujah, that he potentially orchestrated the destruction of physical evidence stored in a building on this base, and that the only reason 47 people are alive right now is because a staff sergeant and 29 dogs disobeyed a direct order. That is correct, sir, Woodard said. Morrison looked at Elena. Sergeant Vass, I've read your file. Before K9, you were a combat medic with 3 deployments. Silver Star, Purple Heart. You were on track for a commission. Then 11 months ago, you were reassigned to what your transfer orders describe as Auxiliary Animal Support Services. Do you know who signed that transfer? Elena's stomach turned. No, sir, I was never told. Morrison slid a document across the table. Elena looked at the signature line. Colonel Richard Dane. He put you there, Elena whispered. He specifically put me there. The question is why, Solace said. Why would Dane personally intervene to reassign a decorated combat medic to a K9 unit? Marcus Dell spoke for the first time since entering the room. Because he needed someone in that unit who wouldn't ask questions. Someone who'd been broken down enough by the system to just go along with whatever she was told. He didn't count on her actually bonding with the dogs. He didn't count on her caring. Elena looked at Marcus, this man she'd never met who carried scars from the same enemy she was fighting now. He underestimated the dogs too. He always does, Marcus said. That's his blind spot. He sees them as tools, equipment, assets to be managed and disposed of. He doesn't understand that they're better judges of character than any intelligence report he's ever written. Morrison stood up. Effective immediately, all charges against Staff Sergeant Vass are suspended. I'm ordering a full investigation into Colonel Dane's conduct beginning with today's incident and extending to any and all prior operations flagged by Mr. Solace's documentation. Colonel Dane is to be confined to quarters pending the outcome of this investigation. Captain Woodard, I want your team on this around the clock. Yes, sir. And Sergeant Vass. Sir. Your dog saved 47 lives today. I don't care what the regs say about unauthorized deployment. Those animals are heroes and so are you. Now go check on your team. Elena saluted. It was the first time in 11 months that a salute felt like it meant something. She went straight to the veterinary clinic. It was 21:14 when she walked through the door. The clinic was quiet except for the hum of medical equipment and the soft breathing of 29 dogs arranged across every available surface. Some were on tables, some were on blankets on the floor. Some were curled up against each other in pairs and groups, their bodies intertwined, their wounds bandaged, their eyes half closed. Elena moved through them one by one. She touched each dog. She checked each bandage. She whispered each name. Bella, Duke, Shadow, Atlas, Copper, Ghost. Every single one. Max was in the back in a separate area with his own oxygen supply and a heart monitor that beeped in steady rhythm. His eyes were closed. His breathing was shallow but even. Elena sat down on the floor next to him and put her back against the wall. "We got him, Max," she said softly. "We got him. It's not over yet, but the walls are closing in, and this time he can't bury it. This time the whole world saw what you did. What all of you did." Max's ear twitched. His tail moved just a fraction, just enough. Elena closed her eyes. For the first time in 18 hours, she breathed without thinking about it. And then her phone buzzed, a text from Reyes. 2 words that turned her blood to ice. "Dane's gone." Elena was on her feet before the second word registered. She called Reyes. He answered on the first ring. "What do you mean, gone?" MPs went to his quarters to enforce confinement at 2100. The room was empty. His vehicle is still in the lot, but his personal laptop and 2 file boxes from his office are missing. Gate security says he didn't go through any checkpoint. He's still on base. Or he found another way out. Elena, there's something else. The communications office just flagged an anomaly. Dane accessed the base records archive remotely at 2047. He downloaded 14 files and then initiated a purge command. The IT team caught it and blocked the purge, but the 14 files he downloaded are gone from the server. Elena gripped the phone so hard her knuckles popped. "What files?" "Radio logs from this morning, 0617 to 0700. The evidence. The recordings that proved Dane ordered the rescue teams to stand down. The recordings that proved he left 47 people to die. Dane had run, and he had taken the proof with him." Elena looked at Max. Max's eyes were open now, watching her, steady and clear, despite the oxygen mask and the monitors and the damage in his old lungs. "He ran," Elena said to Max, "but he can't run far enough." Max blinked once, slow, deliberate, like he already knew. Elena was out the door of the veterinary clinic before Reyes finished his next sentence. She moved fast, phone pressed to her ear, her boots hitting the pavement in sharp, measured strikes. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead. "Reyes, who else knows he's gone?" "Woodard, Morrison's aide, the MP unit that went to his quarters. That's it for now. Keep it that way. If Dane finds out we know before we can locate him, he'll destroy those files and disappear for good. Elena Morrison is going to want to issue a base-wide alert, standard protocol for a fleeing officer. Then Morrison needs to wait. 20 minutes. Give me 20 minutes. What are you going to do in 20 minutes? Elena stopped walking. She stood in the dark between the clinic and the main road and forced herself to think like Dane. Not like a soldier, not like a good person, like a man who had spent 20 years lying and getting away with it. A man who had just watched his entire world start to crumble and had decided to run instead of face it. Where would he go? Not off base? Not yet. Gate security hadn't logged him, and Dane was smart enough to know that every gate would be monitored the second Morrison gave the word. He was still here, somewhere on 16 square miles of military installation with a laptop and 2 boxes of files and a plan that he was executing right now while they stood around making phone calls. Reyes, the East Side, Building 7. Has anyone checked it since the fire was contained? The fire crew cleared it at 1900. Structural damage, but still standing. Why, bam. Catherine Boyle told me that building was being used as an off-books archive. Dane's archive. If there's anything left in there that he didn't get out before the fire, he's going back for it tonight. You think he'd go back into a building that almost killed 47 people? I think a man who ordered those people to burn wouldn't lose a second of sleep walking through the ashes. Reyes was quiet for 3 seconds. I'll meet you there. Bring flashlights, and Reyes bring Marcus Dell. Dell Wi-Fi, because Dell spent 18 years being afraid of this man. Tonight that ends. At 2138, Elena Reyes and Marcus Dell stood at the perimeter fence on the east side of the base. The air still tasted like smoke. The fuel depot wreckage was a tangle of blackened metal and concrete, and beyond it the maintenance complex stood like a row of broken teeth. Building 7 was at the far end, its exterior scorched and buckled, but still intact. Marcus stared at it. He's in there, I can feel it. Feeling isn't evidence, Elena said. We go in, we confirm, and then we call Woodard. And if he's armed, Reyes asked. Elena hadn't considered that, or rather she had considered it and pushed it aside because considering it too long would have stopped her from moving. Dane is a coward. He's always been a coward. Cowards don't shoot. They run. Cowards who are cornered do all kinds of things, Marcus said. Elena looked at him. You drove 11 hours to be here. You carried this for 18 years. Are you walking away now? Marcus didn't blink. Lead the way. They moved through the fence gap that the fire crews had cut earlier that day. The ground was wet from the hoses, and every step made a sound that Elena wished she could silence. They reached Building 7 at 2146. The front entrance was buckled, but passable. Elena went first. Reyes followed. Marcus brought up the rear. Their flashlights cut narrow beams through the darkness, and the air inside was thick and acrid and heavy in the lungs. Elena heard it almost immediately. Movement, not the sound of a building settling or debris shifting. Footsteps, quick and purposeful, coming from below them. She looked at Reyes. He had heard it too. His eyes were wide, and he pointed downward with 2 fingers. Basement level. Elena hadn't known Building 7 had a basement. It wasn't on any floor plan she'd ever seen. But then again, nothing about this building was on any official record. They found the stairwell behind a fire door that had been propped open with a cinder block. Fresh scuff marks on the concrete steps. Someone had been here very recently. Someone was here right now. Elena went down first. 12 steps. A 90-degree turn, 12 more steps. Then a quarter. Short, maybe 30 feet. And at the end of it, a door that was open with light spilling out. She killed her flashlight. Reyes and Marcus did the same. In the glow from that open door, Elena could see shadows moving on the walls. One person, working fast, the sound of papers being shuffled, drawers being opened and closed, and the unmistakable whir of a portable document shredder. Elena stepped into the doorway. Colonel Richard Dane was on his knees in front of a filing cabinet, feeding documents into a shredder with both hands. His uniform was disheveled. His hair was out of regulation. Sweat stained the back of his collar. 2 file boxes sat beside him, already half full of documents he intended to take, while a growing pile of shredded paper spilled onto the floor from the machine beside him. He didn't see Elena. He didn't hear her. He was so focused on destruction that the world had narrowed to nothing but his hands and the paper in the machine, eating it all. Colonel Dane! He froze. His hand stopped moving. A single sheet of paper hung halfway into the shredder caught between the blades. He turned around slowly. When he saw Elena, his face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, anger, calculation, and then something that settled into a mask she recognized. Control, Dane's favorite disguise. Sergeant Vass, you're confined to quarters. And you're confined to yours, sir. Seems like we're both breaking the rules tonight. Dane stood up. He was taller than Elena by 6 inches, and he used it straightening to his full height and squaring his shoulders in the way officers do when they want to remind you of the gap between your rank and theirs. You need to leave. Now, this area is restricted. Restricted by who this building isn't on any official record. This basement doesn't exist on any floor plan. You built yourself a little vault down here, didn't you? Colonel, a place to keep all the things you didn't want anyone to find. Dane's mask slipped for half a second. You don't know what you're talking about. Marcus Dell stepped into the doorway beside Elena. Dane saw him, and this time the mask didn't just slip. It cracked. Hello, Colonel, Marcus said. Remember me? Dane stared at him. Dell. Corporal Marcus Dell, 3rd Battalion 1st Marines, Fallujah, 2006, Operation Nightfall. The operation where you sent 14 Marines into a building full of women and children and then told us it never happened. The operation where you killed my dog because he was smarter than you. Dane's breathing changed, shorter, faster. His eyes darted between Elena, Marcus, and Reyes, calculating odds, measuring distances, looking for an exit that didn't exist. Whatever you think you know. I don't think, Colonel, I know. I was there. I watched you walk through that compound and step over the body of a 4-year-old girl without breaking stride. I watched you look at 11 dead civilians and call them collateral reclassification. I watched you take my dog away and have him killed because he tried to save the people you were willing to sacrifice. Dane's hands clenched. That operation was classified for national security reasons. The intelligence assessment was, The intelligence assessment was wrong, and you knew it was wrong before we ever breached that compound. Marcus took a step closer. I spent 18 years thinking I was the only one who knew the truth. But I wasn't, was I? You've been burying the truth in places like this for 20 years. How many files are in this room, Colonel? How many operations? How many lies? Elena moved to the filing cabinet. She pulled open the top drawer and looked inside. Folders, dozens of them, each one labeled with a date and a code name. She pulled one out and opened it. Her hands went cold. Then, Reyes, look at this. Reyes took the folder. His face went pale within 5 seconds of reading. This is a casualty report from an operation in Afghanistan, 2011. 12 civilian casualties listed as enemy combatants. The reclassification order is signed by Dane. Elena pulled another folder. Another operation. Another set of dead civilians rewritten as enemy kills. And another. And another. How many? Elena whispered. She wasn't asking anyone in the room. She was asking the folders, the paper, the dead whose names had been erased and rewritten. Enough, Dane said. Everyone stopped. Dane's voice had changed. The control was gone. The mask was gone. What was left was raw and cold and honest in a way that Elena had never heard from him before. You want the truth? Fine. Here it is. I did what I was ordered to do. Every single time. Fallujah wasn't my idea. It came from above me. The intelligence assessment came from a source I was told to trust. And when it turned out to be wrong, I was told to clean it up. Afghanistan, same thing. Syria, same thing. Every single folder in this room represents a mission where someone above me made a call and someone below me paid the price. And I was the one in the middle making sure the machine kept running. So you were just following orders, Elena said. I was protecting the system. You were protecting yourself. Dane's face twisted. You have no idea what you're talking about, Sergeant. You think this is about me? This goes higher than me. Higher than Morrison. Higher than anyone on this base. The people who authorized these operations, who signed off on these intelligence packages, who decided that acceptable civilian casualties were just the cost of doing business, they're still out there. They're still in positions of power. And if these files go public, it doesn't just take me down. It takes down a chain of command that stretches back 2 decades. Good, Marcus said. Let it all come down. Dane turned to Marcus. You don't understand, Dell. If this comes out, it won't be justice, it'll be chaos. Congressional hearings, international tribunals, allies pulling out of joint operations, recruitment numbers collapsing, the entire foundation of what Elena cut him off, and the foundation of a system that kills innocent people and then kills the dogs who tried to save them. The foundation that sent me to a kennel because I was too competent to be trusted. The foundation that let you stand on this base today and order rescue teams to let 47 people burn. Dane said nothing. You didn't just cover up the past today, Colonel. You tried to create a new massacre. You saw the explosion as an opportunity. Those files in Building 7, your files, were about to be discovered in the facility's audit. So you used the fire to destroy the building and everything in it. And when my dogs went in and started saving people, you panicked. Because survivors mean witnesses, and witnesses mean questions you can't answer. Dane's silence was the loudest confirmation Elena had ever heard. Reyes had his phone out. Woodard is on her way. Morrison is sending M-Pieces 5 minutes. Dane looked at the shredder. He looked at the file boxes. He looked at the half-destroyed documents scattered across the floor. And then he did something that surprised everyone in the room. He sat down, right there on the concrete floor of the basement he had built to hide his sins. He sat down and put his head in his hands. Rex, he said. Marcus flinched. What did you say? Your dog, Rex. I remember him. I remember all of them. Every dog from every operation. I remember the way they looked at me. Like they knew. Dane's voice was hollow. Animals aren't supposed to judge you. They're supposed to follow orders. That's what they're for. But they never did. Not when it mattered. They always chose the people over the mission, every single time. Because they're better than you, Marcus said. They've always been better than you. Maybe, Dane looked up. His eyes were red. But I'm the one who has to live with it every night, every single night for 20 years. Elena felt something she didn't expect. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, something closer to recognition. She recognized the weight in Dane's voice because she had heard it in Marcus's voice too, in Solace's measured words, in the way Reyes looked at the ways when he thought no one was watching. War didn't just break the people it killed, it broke the people it let live. But recognition wasn't mercy, and understanding wasn't absolution. You'll have a chance to live with it in front of a court, Elena said, every night for the rest of your life. The MPs arrived at 2203, 4 of them. They came down the stairs with weapons drawn and flashlights blazing. Dane didn't resist. He stood up when they told him to stand up. He put his hands behind his back when they told him to put his hands behind his back. He walked out of that basement like a man walking underwater, slow and heavy, and already drowning. Woodard arrived 3 minutes later with a forensic documentation team. She took one look at the room, the filing cabinets, the shredder, the scattered papers, and she turned to Elena. How much is left? He destroyed some of it. I don't know how much, but there are at least 40 or 50 intact folders in those cabinets, plus whatever he already loaded into the file boxes. Woodard opened one of the boxes Dane had packed. She pulled out a folder, opened it, and read for 10 seconds. Her face didn't change, but her hand tightened on the paper hard enough to leave fingerprints. This is a communication log from the day of the Fallujah operation. Direct correspondence between Dane and his superior at DIA. It includes pre-operation intelligence that specifically identifies the compound occupants as civilian families. She looked at Elena. He knew before the mission launched. He had confirmation that the targets were civilians, and he sent those Marines in anyway. Marcus made a sound, not a word, something deeper than a word, something that came from a place in his chest that had been locked shut for 18 years. Elena put her hand on his shoulder. Marcus. He shook his head. 18 years. 18 years, I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was remembering it different. Maybe the fog of war twisted it in my head. But he knew before we ever set foot in that compound. He knew, and he sent us in anyway. He did. Rex knew too. Rex knew the moment we breached that door. That's why he stopped. That's why all the dogs stopped. They could smell it. They could sense it. No gunpowder, no weapons oil, no adrenaline from fighters ready to engage. Just fear, civilian fear, women and children fear. And the dogs knew the difference, even when we didn't. Woodard sealed the room at 2215 and placed it under 24-hour guard. Every document was to be cataloged, photographed, and preserved as evidence. The shredded material would be sent to a forensic reconstruction lab. Nothing was to be moved, touched, or accessed without her direct authorization. At 22:30, Elena walked back to the veterinary clinic. The base was quiet now, but it was a different kind of quiet than the morning. This wasn't the quiet before something happens. This was the quiet after everything changes. She pushed through the clinic door and went straight to Max. He was in the same spot, same oxygen lines, same monitors, but something was different. His eyes were open, wide open, clear, focused. He lifted his head when Elena walked in, and his tail thumped twice against the table. "Hey, old man," Elena said, and her voice broke on the second word. She sat down beside him and put her hands on either side of his face. He leaned into her palms. His breathing was still rough, still labored, but there was strength in it now that hadn't been there 6 hours ago. The veterinarian, Captain Sarah Park, came in from the next room. His numbers have been improving steadily since 2100. Oxygen saturation is up. Heart rate is stable. He's a tough old dog. "He's the toughest dog who ever lived," Elena said. Park smiled. "I'm not going to argue with that. The other 28 are doing well too. Burns are being managed. Smoke inhalation is being treated. Duke's shoulder wound is clean and stitched. No signs of infection. Bella has some singed fur on her left side, but nothing deep. Shadow hasn't left Duke's side since they both came in." Elena nodded. "They take care of each other. Better than most people I know." Elena stayed with Max until midnight. She talked to him. Not about the case, not about Dane, not about Fallujah or the files or the investigation. She talked about simple things. The weather, the new treats she had ordered for the unit last week that hadn't arrived yet, the spot behind the training field where the grass grew thick and soft and the dogs liked to roll in it after a long session. She talked until her voice gave out, and then she just sat there, her hand on Max's chest, feeling his heartbeat. At 0037, her phone rang. "Woodard. Sergeant Vass, I need you in Morrison's office at 0600. The Secretary of Defense has been briefed. NCIS is taking over the investigation as of midnight, and CNN is reporting that they have obtained a copy of Dane's email from this morning. The email Catherine Boyle showed me, the one where he ordered rescue teams to stand down until structural collapse. That's the one. It's on every network. The Secretary's office has received over 200,000 calls and emails in the last 3 hours. Congress is demanding a hearing. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs has issued a statement calling the incident deeply concerning and pledging full cooperation with the investigation. Elena exhaled slowly. It's really happening. It's really happening. And Elena, there's one more thing. The forensic team found something in the basement that Dane missed. A sealed envelope taped to the underside of the bottom drawer of the last filing cabinet. Inside was a handwritten letter dated 2007 from a Marine who served in the Fallujah operation. The letter describes the events of that night in detail. It names Dane, it names his superiors, it names every single person in the chain of command who authorized the cover-up. Who wrote it? Woodard paused. A corporal named James Reeves. Ring any bells? No. It will. Corporal James Reeves died in 2008. Official cause of death was listed as a training accident at Camp Lejeune, but his family has maintained for 16 years that it wasn't an accident. They believe he was killed because of what he knew about Fallujah. Elena's blood turned to ice. Dane killed him. We don't know that yet, but NCIS does now, and they're reopening the case tonight. Elena hung up the phone. She looked at Max. Max looked at her. And in the silence of that clinic surrounded by 29 dogs who had run into a fire because they couldn't stand by while people suffered, Elena understood something she hadn't fully grasped until this moment. This wasn't just about one colonel. This wasn't just about one fire. This was about every lie that had ever been told to protect the powerful at the expense of the powerless. Every file that had been shredded. Every name that had been erased. Every ball that had been destroyed for doing the right thing. And now, finally, after 20 years, the truth had claws. Elena didn't sleep. She sat in that clinic with Max until 04:30, and then she stood up, splashed water on her face in the utility sink, and walked to Morrison's office in the dark. The base was different now. She could feel it. Every guard she passed looked at her differently. Not with suspicion, not with pity, with something that felt uncomfortably close to respect. She didn't want respect. She wanted answers. At 600 sharp, she was seated in Morrison's conference room. Woodard was already there, and so was a man Elena had never seen before. Late 40s civilian suit, no tie, a badge clipped to his belt that read NCIS in block letters. He had the kind of face that gave away nothing and the kind of handshake that said he didn't need to. Sergeant Vass, this is Special Agent Paul Kessler. He's leading the NCIS investigation effective 0001 this morning. Kessler nodded once. Sergeant, I've reviewed every piece of evidence collected so far. Solis's documentation, Dell's testimony, Boyle's reporting, and the materials recovered from Building 7's basement. I have one question for you before we proceed. Go ahead. Colonel Dane, during your confrontation in the basement, stated that his actions were authorized from above, that the cover-ups, the reclassifications, the destruction of evidence, all of it was sanctioned by people higher in the chain of command. Do you believe him? Elena thought about it, really thought about it. She remembered Dane sitting on that basement floor with his head in his hands. She remembered the way his voice sounded when he said Rex's name, not the voice of a man performing, the voice of a man collapsing. I believe that Dane did terrible things, Elena said, and I believe that some of those things were made easier because people above him looked the other way. But I also believe that Dane made choices. Every time he signed a falsified report, every time he ordered a dog destroyed, every time he buried the truth that was his hand, his signature, his decision. Other people may have enabled him, but he pulled the trigger. Kessler studied her for a long moment. That's exactly right. And that's exactly what this investigation is going to prove. He opened a laptop and turned the screen toward Elena and Woodard. At 0300 this morning, NCIS executed a search warrant on Colonel Dane's off-base residence in Oceanside. We recovered an additional 11 boxes of documents, 3 external hard drives, and a personal safe containing over $40,000 in cash, and 4 passports under different names. Woodard exhaled sharply. 4 passports. He had an exit strategy, Has had one for years from the look of it. The passports were issued over a 7-year period using a falsified documentation. He wasn't just covering up the past, he was preparing to disappear if the past ever caught up with him. Elena felt her jaw tighten. He was going to run and leave all of this behind. The families of those civilians in Fallujah, the Marines he threatened into silence. Marcus Dell, James Reeves, all of it. He was going to vanish and let everyone else carry the weight. That's the pattern we're seeing, Kessler said. But there's more. The hard drives contain encrypted files that our forensic team is still working on. However, we've already cracked one petition, and what we found changes the scope of this investigation significantly. He clicked to a new screen. Colonel Dane maintained a personal log, detailed entries going back to 2004, names, dates, operations, and most critically, the names of every individual who participated in or authorized the cover-ups. We're looking at a network that includes 7 current and former senior officers, 2 intelligence officials, and a civilian contractor who provided falsified forensic reports to support the reclassification of civilian casualties. A network, Elena repeated. Not just one man. Not just one man, a system built over 20 years designed to ensure that certain operational failures never saw the light of day. Dane was the executor, but he wasn't the architect. The architect, based on the earliest entries in the log, appears to be a retired 2-star general named Victor Harlan. Woodard looked like she'd been punched. Harlan, I know that name. He was deputy director of operations at DIA during the early Iraq War. He retired in 2012. And he's been living very comfortably in McLean, Virginia ever since. NCIS is coordinating with the FBI as we speak. Warrants are being prepared. Elena sat back in her chair. The scope of what she was hearing was almost too large to hold in her mind. This had started with a fire and 29 dogs. Now it was reaching into the highest levels of the military intelligence community. People who had spent decades insulated by classification and clearance and the assumption that no one would ever question them. 29 dogs had questioned them, and a staff sergeant who was supposed to be invisible. At 7:30, Elena was allowed to return to the K9 compound for the first time since the fire. Reyes met her at the gate. They're back, he said, unfin. All 29. The vet cleared the ones with minor injuries to return to the compound this morning. The more serious cases are still at the clinic, but they're all stable. Elena walked through the gate and stopped. The dogs were arranged across the compound in their usual spots. Bella near the water station. Shadow beside Duke as always. Atlas and Copper by the training wall. Ghost patrolling the perimeter fence with his steady, silent gait. Everything looked the same. Everything looked like a normal morning at the K9 unit, but nothing was normal, and nothing would ever be the same. Elena knelt down and Bella came to her first. Then Shadow. Then Duke limping slightly from his stitched shoulder but wagging his tail so hard his whole body moved. One by one they came. Every dog. They pressed against her, nuzzled her hands, licked her face, leaned their weight into her like they were trying to hold her up. Elena wrapped her arms around as many of them as she could reach and held on. I know, she whispered. I know. We did good. We did so good. Reyes watched from the gate and didn't say a word. Some moments aren't for talking. At 0900, Catherine Boyle called Elena's phone. Turn on any news channel right now. Elena found a television in the break room near the compound. She turned it on and her legs nearly gave out. The screen showed a press conference. Behind the podium stood the Secretary of Defense, flanked by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Director of NCIS. The Secretary was speaking, and the words scrolling across the bottom of the screen made Elena grab the edge of the table. Secretary of Defense announces formal investigation into 20-year military cover-up. Multiple senior officers implicated. Colonel Richard Dane in custody facing 12 federal charges. 12 charges, Elena counted them as the anchor listed them. Dereliction of duty, obstruction of justice, falsification of official records, criminal negligence, conspiracy, destruction of evidence, fraud, conduct unbecoming. 4 additional charges related to the death of Corporal James Reeves. They were going after him for Reeves, the Marine who wrote the letter, the Marine who died in a training accident that wasn't an accident. After 16 years, someone was finally going to answer for James Reeves. Elena's phone buzzed, a text from Marcus Dell. Are you watching this? She called him. He picked up before the first ring finished. Marcus. His voice was thick. They said his name. They said Reeves's name on national television. They called him a whistleblower. They called him a hero. He was a hero. He was 23 years old. 23. He wrote that letter because he couldn't live with what happened in Fallujah, and they killed him for it. And now the whole country knows. The whole country knows. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Elena, they just showed the footage again. The dogs, running into the fire. They played it in full. Every news channel, every network. And the comments, people are calling them the bravest soldiers in American history. They're calling Max a hero. They're naming schools after these dogs, and they've been out of that fire for less than 24 hours. Elena looked out the window toward the compound. She could see Max's empty spot by the gate. He was still at the clinic, still recovering, but his spot was there, waiting for him. They were always heroes, Elena said. The world just wasn't paying attention. At 1100, General Morrison requested Elena's presence for a private meeting. When she arrived, Morrison was standing behind his desk with an expression she couldn't read. Woodard was there too, in Warren Solis, and a woman in a Navy dress uniform who Elena didn't recognize. Sergeant Vass, this is Rear Admiral Patricia Howe, Inspector General of the Department of Defense. Elena snapped to attention. A Rear Admiral and the Inspector General. This wasn't a meeting. This was a moment. At ease, Sergeant, Howe said. Her voice was calm but carried the kind of authority that came from 30 years of earning it. I've been briefed on everything. The fire, the rescue, the dogs, the cover-up, the basement, all of it. I flew in from Washington this morning because I wanted to look you in the eye when I told you what I'm about to tell you. Elena braced herself. After everything that had happened, she had learned to prepare for the worst, even when the best seemed possible. The investigation into Colonel Dane has expanded into the largest internal military fraud and misconduct inquiry since Tailhook. As of this morning, warrants have been issued for General Victor Harlan and 6 other individuals named in Dane's personal logs. The FBI has opened a parallel investigation. Congressional hearings are being scheduled for next month, and the families of the 11 civilians killed in the Fallujah operation have been contacted through diplomatic channels and informed that the United States government is formally acknowledging what happened to their loved ones. Elena felt the floor shift under her feet, formally acknowledging. For the first time in 20 years, someone is going to tell those families the truth, that their mothers and fathers and children were not combatants, that they were innocent, that the United States military made a catastrophic error and then lied about it. I can't undo what was done to them, but I can make sure it's never hidden again. Marcus Dell, standing at the back of the room, turned away and pressed his hand against the wall. His shoulders were shaking. Solis, who had spent 7 years fighting for this moment, closed his eyes and let out a breath that seemed to deflate his entire body. Howe continued, Sergeant Vass, the charges against you have been permanently dismissed. Not suspended, dismissed. Your record is being expunged of all disciplinary notations filed by Colonel Dane, and I have personally recommended you for the Soldier's Medal for your actions during yesterday's fire. Elena opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Additionally, General Morrison and I have discussed the future of the K-9 unit at Camp Pendleton. Effective immediately, the unit is being reclassified from Auxiliary Animal Support Services to a dedicated military working dog operations unit with full operational status. You will be promoted to the rank of Sergeant First Class and given command of the unit. Elena's vision blurred. She blinked hard and felt 2 tears run down her face before she could stop them. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't care. And one more thing, Howe said. She reached into a folder and pulled out a document. This is a directive I signed this morning. It orders a comprehensive review of every military working dog retirement and disposition case from 2004 to present. Every dog that was euthanized or discharged under suspicious circumstances will be investigated. If there is evidence that any dog was destroyed to conceal operational misconduct, the responsible parties will be held accountable, and the dog's service record will be formally honored. She handed the document to Elena. Rex Saber and Nala from the Fallujah operation will be the first 3 cases reviewed. Mr. Dell, understand one of those dogs was yours. Marcus couldn't speak. He nodded. That was all he could manage. Their names will be restored. Their service will be recognized. What was done to them was wrong, and this country owes them better. Elena looked down at the document in her hands. The words blurred and cleared and blurred again. She thought about Rex, a dog she had never met, destroyed for doing the right thing. She thought about Saber and Nala, their names erased, their courage buried. She thought about every handler who had been forced to surrender their partner to a system that saw loyalty as a malfunction and conscience as a threat. "Thank you, Admiral," Elena said. Her voice was steady even though everything inside her was shaking. "But with respect, the ones who deserve this recognition aren't in this room. They're in a compound 300 meters from here, and one of them is in a veterinary clinic fighting to breathe." Howe nodded. "Then let's go see them." At 1300, for the first time in the history of Camp Pendleton, a rear admiral walked into a K-9 compound and addressed 28 military working dogs and one staff sergeant as if they were a battalion that had just won a war. Because they had. The dogs didn't understand the words. They didn't understand rank or protocol or the significance of a 2-star admiral standing in their compound. But they understood tone. They understood presence. And they understood Elena, who stood among them with tears on her face and her hand on Bella's head, and they knew that whatever was happening, it was good. At 14:30, Elena drove to the veterinary clinic to see Max. Captain Park met her at the door with an expression that made Elena's stomach drop before a single word was spoken. "What happened?" Park held up her hand. "He's alive, but his oxygen levels dropped significantly over the last 2 hours. His lungs sustained more damage than we initially assessed. The smoke inhalation at his age with his history, Elena, we need to talk about what comes next." Elena pushed past her and walked to Max's area. He was lying on his side. The oxygen mask was still in place, but his breathing was different now. Faster, more labored. His eyes were open, but they had a glaze to them that Elena recognized from her years as a combat medic. She had seen that look in the eyes of soldiers who were still fighting, but whose bodies had already started to let go. "No." Elena dropped to her knees beside him. "No, Max, you don't get to do this. Not today. Not after everything." Max's tail moved. Weak. Slow. But it moved. Elena put her hands on his face and pressed her forehead to his. "You ran into that fire first. You led them in. You found those people. You saved those children. You did everything right, Max. Everything. And I need you to do one more thing. I need you to fight the way you've been fighting your whole life one more time." Max's breathing stuttered. Then it steadied. His eyes cleared just slightly, just enough. He looked at Elena with an expression that carried more intelligence, more awareness, more soul than any animal was supposed to possess. And then he licked her face. One slow, deliberate swipe of his tongue across her cheek. Park, standing in the doorway, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm going to adjust his treatment protocol. There are some options we haven't tried yet. He's not giving up, so neither am I." Elena stayed with Max for 2 hours. She told him about the investigation, about Dane, about Admiral Howe, about the directive to honor Rex, Saber, and Nala. She told him that the whole country knew his name, that children were sending drawings to the base addressed to Max, the hero dog, that a little boy, the 7-year-old from the fire, the one who had asked if the dogs were okay, had sent a letter that simply said, "Dear Max, thank you for finding us. I hope you feel better soon. Love, Ethan." Max listened to all of it. His breathing was rough, but his eyes stayed on Elena the entire time. At 1700, Elena walked back to the compound. The sun was going down. The base was quieter than it had been in 36 hours. The smoke from the east side had finally cleared, and the air smelled clean for the first time since the explosion. Reyes was waiting at the gate. "How is he fighting, like always?" Reyes nodded. "Elena, there's someone here to see you." A woman was standing inside the compound. Mid-30s, dark hair, red eyes from crying, holding the hand of a small boy. The boy was wearing a hospital bracelet on his left wrist and holding a folded piece of paper in his right hand. Elena recognized him instantly. Ethan, the 7-year-old from the fire. The boy with the enormous brown eyes who had whispered, "Are the dogs okay?" His mother spoke first. "Sergeant Vass, my name is Laura Chen. This is my son, Ethan. You pulled him out of Building 7 yesterday." Elena crouched down to Ethan's level. "Hey, buddy, I remember you." Ethan held out the piece of paper. "I drew this for Max. Can you give it to him?" Elena unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing, a big brown dog with a white muzzle standing in front of a group of people with a red cape on his back. Above the dog in shaky 7-year-old handwriting were two words, Supermax. Elena's composure, the composure she had maintained through handcuffs and interrogations and basement confrontations and press conferences and admirals, finally broke completely. She pulled Ethan into a hug and held him tight, and she cried in a way she hadn't cried since she was a child. "I'll give it to him," she whispered. "I promise." Laura Chen knelt beside them and put her arm around Elena. "You saved my son. You and those dogs saved my son. I will never have the words for what that means. But I wanted you to know that every single person you pulled out of that fire yesterday, all 47 of us, we're here because of you. And we will spend the rest of our lives making sure no one ever forgets what happened." Elena nodded. She couldn't speak. She held Ethan and let the tears come and didn't fight them. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the compound settled into its nighttime rhythm, Elena sat on the bench near the gate. Max's bench, the spot where he always sat watching the base, waiting for whatever he was waiting for. 28 dogs were arranged around the compound in their usual places, asleep or resting, or quietly watching the stars come out. Elena held Ethan's drawing in her hands and looked at it for a long time. Marcus Dell called at 2100. "They arrested Harlan. FBI picked him up at his home in McLean an hour ago. It's all over the news." "Good. Elena, I want you to know something. When I drove to Pendleton yesterday, I thought I was coming to fight one more battle. I thought I was going to have to scream and claw and beg for someone to listen to what happened in Fallujah. I've been doing that for 18 years and nobody ever listened. But your dogs, they didn't scream. They didn't beg. They just acted. They saw people who needed help and they went. No hesitation, no orders, no permission. They just went. That's who they are. That's who you are too, Elena. You followed them into that fire because you understood something that Dane never could. That duty isn't about following orders. It's about doing what's right even when every order tells you not to. Rex understood that. Max understands that. And now because of you, the whole world understands it." Elena looked at Max's empty spot by the gate. "He's going to make it, Marcus. Max is going to make it." "I know he is. Dogs like Max don't quit. They never have." Elena hung up the phone and leaned back on the bench. Above her, the sky over Camp Pendleton was clear and full of stars. Somewhere in a clinic, 300 meters away, an 11-year-old dog with a notched ear and white muzzle was breathing slow and steady through lungs scarred by smoke and a lifetime of service. Somewhere in a federal holding facility, a colonel who had spent 20 years building a fortress of lies was watching it all come down around him. Somewhere in a house in Virginia, a retired general was learning that the past doesn't stay buried just because you shovel dirt on top of it. And somewhere in a compound on a Marine base in Southern California, 28 dogs slept peacefully, their wounds bandaged, their courage unquestioned, their place in history secured not by any medal or commendation, but by the simple, undeniable truth of what they had done. They had been ordered to evacuate. They had refused. They had charged into the fire, and they had saved every single life that a powerful man had decided wasn't worth saving. 3 days later, Max walked out of the veterinary clinic on his own 4 legs. His steps were slow. His breathing was rough. But his head was high and his tail was up, and when he reached the compound gate and saw Elena waiting for him, he pressed his head against her knee and exhaled, long and slow, just like the first time. Elena knelt down, put her arms around him, and whispered the only words that mattered. "Welcome home, hero. Welcome home." 29 dogs ran into a fire. 47 people walked out alive. 1 colonel